Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. It's good to be with you. We've got some folks in the house already. Shout out to Nate2D2 and Brother Steve. And we're going to be continuing in Matthew. So it's an exegetical study, pretty much one section at a time. And what I like to do is find something that's a takeaway. There is a lot to Jesus's resurrection, and so we're going to get to it. But tonight we're going to look at the fact that Jesus had pre-set up a meeting actually before his crucifixion that the disciples were supposed to go to. And they don't go running to that meeting. So we're going to get started by me sharing the screen. Shout out to Slam RN. Good to have her here. Now, when I share the screen, I try to go back and forth a little bit, but I want you to be able to see stuff. And it's particularly if we're doing Logos Bible software, I want you to be able to see the Bible software. And so we're going to be looking at the prearranged meeting that Jesus set up with his disciples and the resurrection and some of the material around that. Now, one of the things I want to do, and it's interesting, it's for background's sake, was the claim that someone would resurrect or that there would be a resurrection strange to Judaism at the time? Now, you'd say, well, it's not strange to the Bible. Well, I'm not talking about that. How was the Bible understood at the time? Now, I firmly believe that the doctrine of the resurrection is findable in the Old Testament, but it is not as apparent in the Old Testament as it is in the New. And so one might miss it, and different Jewish sects had different opinions on the resurrection. And so I want to review those slightly. There was a dispute in Judaism that really actually makes its way into the Talmud, and eventually resurrection gets affirmed as a doctrine in Judaism. But today, among Reformed Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, resurrection would be denied. And so it's not as simple as the Bible saying it. This was a hot button issue in Jesus's day. We're going to see it even affects Paul before the Sanhedrin. It's that big an issue. And so I like to bring up these historical things because what we understand from the Bible is true, but did everyone understand what we understood from the Bible? This is kind of a Jewish roots thing. And I want you to know that this becomes a bone of contention, actually, in different sects of Judaism. The Pharisees held a firm belief in the resurrection of the dead for both the just and the unjust. Understand that. While the Sadducees denied the resurrection. So it's not as simple as simply saying, well, resurrection is a slam dunk issue. The reason for that is that the Old Testament is less clear about the afterlife than the New Testament. It's one of the reasons that Judaism does very little with the afterlife. And I'm going to switch this so that we're equal size. No, there is no way to do that, right? And so there is no real way to get me and the PowerPoint up at the same time. By the way, if you don't like the PowerPoint up, I give the community the opportunity to please let me know what you prefer. The PowerPoint is made available to all, and so it could be run simply with you being told to pull up your own copy of the PowerPoint. But I'm thrilled to go ahead and take you through it. I think it's a really neat teaching tool. You're wondering where my little virtual helpers went. I haven't given up on them. I just haven't used them lately. They've been on vacation, but that also is something that's a lot of fun to do. So your feedback helps me make things better. And I'm just throwing that out there to give you the opportunity. And some people have come up with really good suggestions. Let me keep moving on here. Okay, this really becomes a hot button issue. And let me explain what's going on here. Okay, Paul is yanked in front of the assembly, the Supreme Court. And so he's basically giving his testimony. And in the process of doing so, he knows that there are Sadducees and Pharisees. In fact, I can go ahead and pull this up and we can go through the background of this, because this is really clever on Paul's part. Let me be really honest. This is really clever on Paul's part. So I'm in Acts 23 real quick here. And I'm going to go to Acts 23. I'm going to pull this up. But Paul does something pretty clever here. The Sanhedrin divided. Okay. And Paul basically is falsely accused here. But Paul was often falsely accused. And so here's your section here. And he's being tried by the Sanhedrin. And I'm not going to give too much background here, okay? But he is falsely accused. He ends up explaining that he was sent also to the Gentiles, which is not like the thing the crowd really wants to hear. And so the next day he's brought in front of the Sanhedrin. He's released from his bonds and commanded the high priests and all their council to appear, and they brought Paul down. Now, I've included the PowerPoint in the actual here, but Paul's going to do a very clever thing. He knows that this is a contentious issue. And so he talks about having seen the resurrected Jesus and being commanded to go to the Gentiles. And that's going to create a problem for the Sadducees and the Pharisees because they're not agreed on this particular point of doctrine. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection. By the way, they claim there is no angel or spirit. They were more naturalistic, kind of like Reformed Judaism is today. The Pharisees believed in the angels, and they believed in resurrection, and they believed more dualistically. And they believed that there was an afterlife. So this is a bone of contention. So Paul gives his testimony, and now the court has to rule, but there's a division between the two groups. And so now there's a loud outcry here, and the scribes of the Pharisees rose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man." Why do they find no evil in him? Because by his own testimony, okay, if an angel or spirit spoke to him, let us, not fight against God. And there arose so the scribes of the Pharisees, those would be the Bible writers, transcriptionists of the Pharisees, basically they protest and say, well, the fact that he claims that this resurrected individual talked to him is not necessarily a problem in and of itself. And this becomes a problem that there's this internal strife. And so the commander, fearing that Paul would be pulled to pieces, commands that the soldiers go down and take him from among them and bring him into the barracks. And that takes him out of the jurisdiction of the Sanhedrin. But the point is, this is such a contentious issue for these two groups. Now, eventually this gets settled because the Talmud has a portion that says that one who does not believe in the resurrection has no share in the world to come. Absolutely none. And so this becomes an issue of orthodoxy. And eventually Judaism, at least classical Judaism, affirms the resurrection. It's later affirmed in the 13 Articles of Maimonides. Now, that's a point with the 13 Articles of Maimonides that we could actually agree with. Although given panentheism, I don't really understand how that works. And so that's another question for panentheism. However, what you need to understand is that the resurrection was believed to apply to both the just and the unjust. So there would be a resurrection of both. This is probably connected to Daniel 12, 1 through 2, although the contention of the Sadducees was that would not be good enough. And let me pull up why that would not be good enough, okay? This gets settled, but it isn't settled at this point, okay? The Sadducees said that only the 5 books of Moses were binding, so they did not believe that the writings and the prophets held the same level of inspiration as the 5 books of Moses. That was their contention. They even struggle with Jesus over this very issue, where they try to test Jesus on this point by constructing this very lengthy, weird hypothetical about a woman who had gone through several Levirate marriages, and then in the resurrection, whose husband would she be? And so they asserted that that was not good enough, that it had to be in the 5 books of Moses. Jesus proves that you can derive the resurrection from the statement that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I had planned to prove the resurrection, but it would be very interesting to actually go to that gospel account. And so I'm going to take the time here. Now, this is probably really bad form to take the time to actually go to the scriptures to look at this account. And I'm going to try to move up here real quick. And I may not be able to get to it right away. So I'm going to do something in Logos. I'm going to actually show you a trick with Logos. Can you hang out with me while I show you something in Logos? I can go to a Bible section here. I can go here. I can put in Matthew. And if I can type, right? Matthew. Right here. And I'm going to put resurrection in. And what Logos will do is pull that up now, and it'll actually give it to me. Okay, so it's 22:30. So I was right in the right area. Here's Jesus's argument as far as the resurrection. And I think it's worthy of review, because what the Sadducees said, and we probably covered this, was that you could not prove the resurrection from the 5 books of Moses. And so Jesus goes here to the Old Testament. He's particularly going to where God declares that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And really, Logos should pull up the cross-reference. And I kind of wish it did, because that would really be good. But you'll find in Exodus 3 that God calls himself the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if we go to Exodus 3, here we're going to find this passage. And he's going to make a point based on the verb tense. And I'd like you to see the verb tense here. Okay, and this is a verb tense. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, that's one place where you find this. Okay? There are other places. But what I want you to see is the verb tense here, and I'm highlighting it. And I don't know whether you guys can make your screens bigger, but I cannot go over 200% here. So let's go here. And what you see here is the nochi. And that's present active indicative. It has the idea of I am. Okay, so it's not just I, but it's I am. It's a pronoun, but it has the idea of I am here. Ani would just be I, but you could do this here too. And the am is in italicized because it's understood, but it's understood as a present active indicative in the terms of nochi. So when nochi is used, it can be understood this way. There's no real verb provided, but the verb is understood, and it's understood to be a present active indicative. And that's what Jesus is pointing to. It's considered to be present as opposed to past. Okay? And so that's really where that comes in. And now we got something here I don't want. I don't need the new Bible commentary on this. So I'm going to go back to the Matthew and look at the point that Jesus makes. Jesus says that God is not a God of the dead, but of the living. And he's pointing to the verb tense here in order to make his case. And he's deliberately going to the Pentateuch in order to make that case. And now I can go over here in Logos and check out the history section here and go there. Okay. And that brings us back to our text. Where do you find resurrection in the Old Testament? Well, you find it in the writings. Job is considered a writing, Daniel's considered a writing, and Psalms is considered a writing. So they're all considered writings, and that's where you find this in the scriptures. And so the Sadducees are correct in the sense that you don't find it explicitly in the sense of being stated the same way. In other words, you find more evidence for it in the writings than you do in the Pentateuch. But it doesn't mean it isn't in the Pentateuch. It is understood from the fact that the verb isn't there, and it's understood as a present tense verb in that construction. Okay? And so that's the point Jesus makes, is you can infer it from the statement of who God is and the fact that he talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the present tense. I am the God of your fathers, not I was the God of your fathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the clear places where it is revealed are in the writings. So Jesus presents a good case for it. But you can find it in the writings. Now, a powerful place is in Psalm 16:10, which is messianic, because David refers beyond himself to his greater ancestor. One of the most powerful places is Daniel 12:1-3. If you want to understand about judgment and stuff like that, Daniel is pretty clear. Daniel is dealing with the tribulation period in terms of Israel and talking about what will happen after that period, and that's why the resurrection was associated with the Messianic era. Job talks about seeing God in his flesh, with these eyes in this flesh, which would imply a resurrection, because there's no way that Job would see God with these eyes if there was no resurrection. Now, the resurrection is an important doctrine because saints who had died in the Old Testament were still looking forward to the kingdom, but they were dead. And Jews never envisioned a non-physical kingdom. For them, the kingdom of God would be a physical kingdom. So how does a dead saint enter a physical kingdom? Well, the resurrection helps us bridge the gap and to connect these doctrines, that there'll be a physical kingdom and there'll be saints who have been promised the kingdom. And so resurrection is the mechanism, and that's why Daniel becomes important in Daniel 12:1-3, because it explains how Old Testament saints will enter the kingdom even though they're already dead, being a physical kingdom. And so Daniel connects the Messianic era to the resurrection, which is terribly interesting given that Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. And so that becomes really important. Now, let's deal with the first section of this. I'm going to do it through the PowerPoint because that slide looks a lot better and it's a lot more readable. But I don't want you just staring at the slide. I know that gets kind of weird. And eventually I'm going to put myself in there. Yes, I am still here. I did not go for coffee. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began, now stop there. Just want to let you know that after the Sabbath, if the first day of the week is after the Sabbath, the first day of the week is not Monday. And Jews don't even count it that way. Sunday is still regarded as the first day of the week. And so that's why you'll see old calendars with Sunday being the first day of the week, but not the first day of the work week. Began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone. We're going to talk about how heavy these stones were. Okay, these were not pebbles and what it would take, and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. So he's a sight to behold. And the guards shook for fear of him, became as dead men. It doesn't say they became dead men. They became as dead men. And the angel answered and said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord laid. And go quickly and tell the disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I told you. And they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and with great joy, and ran to bring the disciples word. Now that's our first section here that we're looking at. And there's some real significant stuff in here. Now, the first thing is the indication is that it was after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week is dawning. So we're talking about Sunday morning. Now, there's a big thing over the Sabbath. Why did Christians start meeting on Sunday? They probably started meeting on Sunday not because it was the Sabbath. I dislike when Christians say it's the Sabbath. It's the Lord's Day. It got associated with the resurrection. That's why that's there. But there is some discussion about that. They would put them the first day of the week, and I want you to note this, the way Jews reckon the first day of the week would have started at 6 p.m. on our Saturday. That's real important to note, because the day doesn't start with the morning, nor does it start at 12 o'clock. So Sunday starts at sunset. Now, right now, the sunset's a little late here, but as we get into winter, by the time I'm doing these broadcasts, it is already the next day in Hebrew. If it was as the day is dawning, it was just before dawn when it was starting to get light out, probably on Sunday morning. But you know how it is. These things are always discussed among theologians. There are those that would disagree and say that the Greek particle there does not indicate as or then, okay, now after, but actually indicates that it was prior to. And has the women praying prior, visiting prior to the end of the Sabbath. I tend to think that it makes a lot of sense for Jesus to rise on Saturday because he fulfilled all the law, and in his resurrection, he would be observing the Sabbath. His body would be resting. It makes sense to me. I'm not going to get dogmatic about it, but it seems to fit the narrative. It's also unlikely that the women would travel to the tomb just before the Sabbath because they would have to walk back. And there was a whole issue of how far you could travel on the Sabbath. And that may have been a little risky for them to get back. So there are reasons for me to believe that the Sunday morning, as it was getting light out, would make perfect sense to me. Now, what we want to see is that Mary and Mary are the witnesses, and it was noted before that they were present at the crucifixion. So we're going to talk about whether they could provide any sort of eyewitness testimony. What was the view of women as witnesses? Now, there are a lot of nasty comments in the Talmud, but remember that the Talmud is not codified, and some parts of it are earlier as tractates than others. So when we're talking about Akiva and Shammai, we're talking prior to Jesus. But not all of the Talmud exists prior to Jesus. There are parts that come later. And so we want to be careful with the Talmud as a continuous book compiled prior to Jesus's time, because I don't think that would be good scholarship. So let's pull something about Judaism's view on women, because you now have women witnesses. Well, are they going to be believed? There was an issue with that. The view of women had different expressions during the Second Temple period. Remember, we don't have formative Judaism all set in place neatly. The Talmud does in places seem to downgrade women. However, it was allowable for women to follow Jesus and to be part of Reformation movements. Also, they were there at the crucifixion and they would be in good place. And so you could say these are women, but you know what? They were actually there at the crucifixion and they can testify that the one they saw crucified is the one they saw, that is the one who resurrected from the dead. I went to an article. This jumped, and I don't know why it did. Okay, I went to a really neat article in the Jewish Annotated New Testament by Tal Elan. And I think I pronounced that correctly. Many voices arising in Christian circles, which praise feminist Christianity. And I'm, okay, this is him analyzing and speaking here over and over against women-hating, misogynistic Judaism are misplaced historically. While it is true Judaism was basically a patriarchal system, Second Temple Judaism, in which Jesus grew and gained, understand that's the type of Judaism we're talking about. Second Temple Judaism gained its inspiration, recognizing options for women to join sectarian renewal movements, and Jesus' movement similarly enjoyed discipleship of many women. And so this is the Jewish annotated text. It is highly likely that it would not be uncommon to find female followers, and that these women could be said to be in a position to know where the tomb was and to know who would have been buried there and to be eyewitnesses that Jesus actually died. And so that's a slam dunk, right? Well, we're going to talk about at least one theory that was made very popular. It's not the one Muslims use, but to the most, they use it, but it isn't necessarily the only one you find. And there's one that they will fall back to. It's important to note the size and placement of the tomb. So what I did here was demonstrate what this tomb would have looked like. Okay. And you can see the stone there. And let me bring that up. See the round stone? That's the stone that would have been used. And it would have slid. See this thing that it would have slid on? This is the way the tombs were set up. There you have a space for that stone to slide. When it slides, it's going to cover this circular section here and seal the tomb. Okay. Now, it's almost impossible for a wounded Jesus to be able to move this thing. But how impossible is it? Well, how big was this thing? Well, we're going to talk about one of these theories. One of the theories against the resurrection that's fairly old is the swoon theory, and we've discussed it. He recovered from his wounds, moved the stone, prepared, showed himself to the disciples. What he would have looked like, he would not have looked glorified and robust, okay? This became real popular. Muslims don't use it as much. They say that Jesus was replaced by Judas, which is terribly interesting because Judas is recorded as having committed suicide. So I don't know how a dead Judas ends up doing that. Okay. Could Jesus have rolled it away? I want to talk about the size of this thing. All right, this type of stone, depending on the type of stone used, because some stones are lighter than others, some materials are lighter than others, could weigh between 1 and 2 tons. Okay, it's quite heavy. 2 men would move this thing into place, and there was a depression there, so the stone tended to sit in that depression. If it took 2 guys to move it, a previously crucified individual is not going to be able to do this. In fact, with the groove, he would have been pushing up against gravity because it fit in a groove, a 2,000-pound stone to open the tomb after having undergone scourging. Remember, he underwent scourging, but even before crucifixion. Okay, which means a tremendous amount of blood loss. And of course, he would then have to move the stone. There were two guards set there who didn't really notice him or were so intimidated by this scourged individual who was like half dead moving this stone. And then he would have had to present himself to the disciples at some point. This is quite a claim. This is like an insane claim. You'd be better arguing that the Gospels don't record the incident correctly than that they do, and Jesus swooned. Okay. And I don't know why this went back here. It should move forward. Okay. Given the structure, simply pushing the stone out of the way is just not possible. Okay. Hey, shout out to Elizabeth Oakman. Okay. This is one big rock. Why is this a problem for Judaism? Because they've got to claim that the disciples came and stole the body. Even they weren't silly enough to try the swoon theory, that Jesus swooned and he recovered from his wounds and moved a 2-ton rock and appeared before the disciples. And by the way, that would impress the disciples to no end. I got this half-dead guy who I think died, and he comes and he basically tells me, I have beaten death. I am resurrected by the power of God. And, you know, he's like bleeding and the wounds are open and he's half dead. And really? You know, I'm going to believe he rose from the dead? That's not what resurrection would have looked like. Now, the women are a little unnerved by the angel, whose appearance is quite glorious. And so the angel answered and said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know you seek Jesus who has been crucified. By the way, the angel is aware that Jesus has been crucified. Of course, we have the women's testimony for that, but he's not here. He's risen, and we've read this before. He's going to there to tell the disciples. So they're to be witnesses, the first witnesses of the resurrection to the disciples. We're going to talk about where the disciples were and why the disciples were AWOL, because the disciples were AWOL. Go quickly and tell them, indeed, he is going. Now, the he there is Jesus, before you, before the women, into Galilee, and there you will see him. Behold, I have told you. Now, the women's first response is what you always get with angels. And yes, I will admit to liking the way God is portrayed as the good God and the way the problem of evil is answered in Touched by an Angel. And by the way, Roma Donnie has a really nice accent. And I'm going to admit to that. So I'm on record. Yes, I have watched Touched by an Angel. Is it theologically accurate? Not in every area. But its presentation of the problem of evil is much like Elvin Plantinga, Free Will Defense. And I really like the way they deal with it. And they had one episode where literally they were preaching the gospel to Jewish people virtually. I mean, not perfectly, but the blood on the door thing, and the guy's got to put blood on the door and trust God, even though he's like an agnostic type Jew, was really kind of impressive to me. And so I admit it. But angels do not look like Roma Donnie. And they definitely don't look like Della Reese. All right. They are awesome in appearance. Okay. They are awesome in appearance. When you encounter an angel and he says, behold, I am an angel of God, which they tried to do with the lighting, you are like really awestruck. Okay. And so angels always start with do not fear. Now, the way this is read in the Greek is it's a negative particle, okay, and an imperative. So it's a negative command, do not fear. And, you know, I've always been amazed that angels could say, do not fear, because I don't often feel like I have a whole lot of power over my fears. Like I could just choose not to be fear. afraid, and Nate admitted it too. So we're in good company here. I know who I could have coffee with, and thank you, Nate. And Slam says, "Fear not." You could say it that way, "Fear not" or "Do not fear." Both are legitimate in the Greek. Okay, "Fear not" works for me, but I don't do so well in just turning my emotions off. Even though I tend to be, very rational and I like to be analytical, I just, I can't necessarily turn off those emotions. Can angels really say to us, "Do not fear"? I mean, can we just like turn off our feelings? Human feelings don't work quite that neatly. Okay, it's how we respond to those feelings and what we believe that's going to determine whether we keep fearing. Okay. Now, if those women are trusting that angel, they're going to believe his message and they're going to believe that they are not to fear. So, what I said, we fear when we believe things. And one of the enemy's greatest tricks is to get us to believe lies. My daughter's been to some NANC counseling, which is a Bible based counseling. And basically, what she always talks about is most of our problems, okay, is believing lies before we're saved and even after our saved. Remember, Satan is the father of lies. And so one of his great tricks is to get us to believe lies to produce the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit. And so we do that pretty well. We're terribly able to deceive ourselves with a little help from him prior to being saved. But even as saved, he whispers lies in our ears. And so fear is not an improper emotion. Okay, if I'm like, my car is going to go over a cliff, I will have some anxiety. Okay, but the issue is whether I keep fearing is going to depend on me being willing to allow God to change my thinking. Okay, whether I'm going to ask him to give me his perspective and help me deal with my emotions and hit the off switch, or whether I'm going to keep believing a lie. And so I am looking a lot at the fear that is around us right now and what is it all based on. And so the angel says, believe us, believe me, actually. It's not angels. Believe me, accept my message, do not fear. And so God commanding us not to fear is commanding us to believe him. And in this case, the angel is asking the women to believe him. Okay. Now, what are the disciples doing right now? Well, they're pretty scared. Remember, they all kind of split for the most part. They are scared and they are cowering because they are expected that they are next. And they are expecting to be arrested. If Jesus is a great deceiver and you are propagating his teaching, you are following a false teacher and you are seducing Israel, which makes you liable to the judgment of the Sanhedrin. Okay. Now, what's important about this meeting, look at this, is that Jesus had set it up previously. So the disciples had an appointment. Look at Matthew 26:32. And after I have been raised, I will go before you into Galilee. And so they have a previous appointment, which they are not moving to keep because they are frightened. Jesus is going to have to do a lot to get these guys to understand what's happened here. Because again, as Jewish disciples, they did not expect Jesus's crucifixion. It was the least expected thing. Did he tell them it was going to happen? Yeah, he did. But remember, they're looking for the kingdom and they're not looking for an interim. Which again demonstrates to me that the church in Israel are different because if they did know what Israel was, but they did not expect the church interim. All right. Now, Galilee is a fairly okay place. Do they know where to go? Yeah, to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. Jesus had picked a place and said that after I'm raised, you're supposed to go there. Now, I want to talk again about mountains. Pay attention to your mountains. All right? They already knew where this was. Jesus didn't say, hi, I have a previous appointment with you, and expect they didn't know where it was. And by the way, I'm thrilled that Elizabeth is able to be with us. So she normally has a Zoom Bible study, and I guess we are it for tonight. So excellent. Why didn't they go there? Because they were afraid. Their fear had paralyzed them. And so the delay most likely is they didn't go there because they were busy being afraid. Now, why a mountain? Because this thing has been going on. Okay, the Jewish person's going to connect the Mount of the Beatitudes, okay, where Jesus gives them the new Torah, with the fact that Jesus has appointed them to meet on a mountain. Okay? Matthew is bringing this out because of this mountain motif. The Abrahamic covenant is reiterated, reestablished with the binding of Isaac on a mountain. The law is received at Sinai on a mountain. Jesus tells them to go to a mountain. It's one of the things I like about living in Arizona. All right? It's mountains. Jerusalem is set on a mountain. Mountains are connected with covenants. And so Jesus tells them to go to a mountain. And this is again demonstrating Jesus as the greater Moses. All right? And which is one of the things. Now, Israel receives its commissioning at Sinai. There are a bunch of tribes, they have a promise, but they become a nation at Sinai. In a sense, Israel receives her commissioning at Sinai. It's in the context of the reiteration of the law in Deuteronomy, where God says that you are a particular treasure, a royal priesthood, a people given to God alone. Now, that's in Deuteronomy, but Deuteronomy is the repetition of the law. And so they receive their commissioning at Mount Sinai under Moses. The disciples are going to receive their commissioning under Jesus on a mountain. So the greater Moses is giving the new community its commissioning on a mountain, just as Israel, God's community in the front part of your Bible, receives their commissioning on a mountain to carry out God's purposes in the present age. Do you know what you're supposed to be doing? Well, we'll get to it when we get to the Great Commission, but that is the commission for the church. And I don't think it applies just to the disciples there. I think it is the ongoing commission for the church. So churches that are doing their job and individual believers are involved in that commission in some way. Okay? Now, let's get into some spiritual formation. And I know that I may end a little early here, but I think this is a thought that occurred to me that is so cool. Do we have dark nights of the soul? Yeah, we do. We have times where it's hard to discern God's hand in our lives, where we don't see Jesus apparently, where God's face is, so to speak, a little hidden from us. Okay? These disciples, the last thing that they were aware of was Jesus's crucifixion. Jesus has been crucified, and they are without their leader. They are without Jesus. They're without their connection to God. They are floundering. They are floundering big time. And there are those times in our lives where we have trouble discerning God's presence. There are even seasons in our lives where this is difficult. When I was a new believer, it's like being in love for the first time. Okay, it's like that instant period. As you age as a believer, that changes a little bit. Doesn't mean God isn't present. It feels a little different. It feels a little different, and it is a little different. And there are those dark nights of the soul. I didn't coin the term dark night of the soul. It was used in our spiritual formation class by John Coe. And so there are those times when we're like the disciples. In fact, I feel like the whole church has gone through a period of time where it has been very hard to discern God in the darkness. And I don't even think we're through it. Guys, I wish I could say to everybody who's viewing this video that it's all going to just get better. It was all supposed to go away, right? I don't feel like it's all going away. I don't think it is all going away. I continue to watch stuff in Australia. We now have the Taliban back in Afghanistan. There are believers there that are in terrible trouble. Okay, there are those. What do we do with those? What do we do with those? How do we find our way in those sorts of things? I'm going to say, from a spiritual formation standpoint here, that we need to go back to where we last saw him. I like the Chronicles of Narnia, and in there's a place where only Lucy is aware of, and I think it's not the Dawn Treader, but it's Prince Caspian, and they cannot find Aslan, and the only one who's picking up on Aslan is Lucy, who's the youngest. And when they get to the stone table, all of a sudden they can see Aslan because they went to the place where they last saw him. And in a sense, we need to go back to the place where we last saw Jesus. And how do we do that? Well, I think the spiritual disciplines are a help to us. What are the spiritual disciplines? I'm talking about prayer, Bible reading. Okay, I'm not being mystical all over you. I'm talking about scripture meditation. However you find to do that, going back to those disciplines, in a sense, is going back to the last place we saw him, so to speak. And remembering our position in Christ through those disciplines and with those disciplines is going to help us find Jesus in the dark night of the soul, in the dark place that we may find ourselves. And so I think that as we're looking at the disciples and we're considering them real people, this must have been very frightening for them. And I think when we are frightened, we need to run back to those things. And one of the things that we can learn to do is tell ourselves the truth. I'm not real perfect at it, but we need to tell ourselves the truth. When we encounter the lie, we have to tell ourselves the truth. And so what do we know about who we are in Christ and what God has planned and who God is the way we get out of those things. And again, as a guy who struggles sometimes with sleep, I'm not necessarily really good at it. There are some neat scripture meditation apps. There's scripture story apps. I like Abide. Listen to some music, some scripture. Nature sounds are helpful to me because they remind me of creation. And let's just face it, the sound of the waves against the shore is very relaxing, especially if you live in Arizona where you don't get to see much water. You can forget the waves of the ocean lapping against anything in Arizona. Really useful. So the disciples didn't see Jesus. They had to go where they were supposed to. They had to kind of see him again, find him again. We too need to go back to where we've seen Jesus. Where have I seen Jesus? even rehearsing the things that God has done for us is good. And Elizabeth summed it up by saying we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. I'm just giving some practical methods of making that work. But it is useful. We have an appointment with Jesus too. We have been called, but I don't want to get to the Great Commission before I get to the Great Commission. So if you're watching this and you're saying, wow, he went far afield. No, I didn't. I'm making practical theology out of exegetical and biblical theology. And I'm saying, how do we practice what we see here? And we do that by going back to where we've seen Jesus and keeping an appointment. And remembering, basically the covenant that we have. We need to go to that mountain meeting that the disciples were too scared to go to. And that's practical. So welcome to the Bible lesson that went from exegetical theology to Jewish backgrounds to practical theology, all in one lesson. And I think that is a good way to give people something to make this very practical to them. So, and you got some backgrounds that are there. Sorry about the little glitches. Sometimes I'm doing these and a verse comes to mind and I want to go take you to it and show it to you in the original languages. And I get excited about that and talk about the backgrounds. And so sometimes Logos does not keep up with me. Well, you guys are incredibly faithful. We picked up a few new viewers and subscribers. I hope they stay on. Thank you for being the small, faithful community that tunes in regularly. We'll probably hit a different topic next Wednesday. But I think that kind of sums it up. I think. And I'm just looking through here. I don't think there'll be a lot of questions here because I think it's kind of almost review. But we can deal with these dark nights of the soul. So I'm going to remove this. And Slam already said thank you. Slam, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And Nate, thank you. You guys are absolutely great. Elizabeth, thank you for being able to join us and swap to your PC. Really appreciate it. Brother Steve, you are a real blessing. And a little bit more, paying attention to Facebook, okay, and to other things. I'm looking at a discussion related to Molinism and just how I would take that and how I'd unravel that. And just, how I look at those things, how I analyze them, and whether I think the case is built sufficiently or whether I think the case kind of falls short. So that's a distinct possibility, but God is in control and he will lead me. Thank you, Built for Speed, for being here. So that's what I'm saying to you is pay attention to the Facebook posts and pay attention to Patreon. Zion's banner on Facebook. I usually try to post what I'm doing. And then Patreon, and some of you I don't have any other way to get a hold of. So then you just tune in and get surprised. So if you are late, it's YouTube. You can always go back and watch it. Remember, hit that like button. And I think that about does it for tonight. God bless. And stay strong. Keep the spiritual disciplines going and the spiritual muscles going during the weird times we live in. Okay. That's interesting to me. because Dr. Louis Feinberg said something about Molinism in terms of compatibilist freedom and libertarian freedom. So we'll see. I've got to analyze it and see where I'm at, because I want to be able to do my homework if I bring it to you. So, and I almost want to ask whether Slam finds them compatible or incompatible, but I think I'll leave that. And you can chime in if I do that program or something like it. Well, God bless, and I'm going to put an Erev Tov down here. We're about at our time. Be strong, stay strong, and keep moving forward.